Welcome to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten. I am here in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the State of Israel and the Jewish people, alongside Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. He's actually traveling this week on a speaking tour for JNS, also doing some fundraising while he's in the States. Alex, good to see you up there on the screen.
Good to see you as well. And of course, as you mentioned, JNS is a reader and a viewer-supported news agency. So I am doing the meeting incredible people, speaking to nice crowds, together with JNS CEO, Editor-in-Chief Jonathan Tobin. We're having a good time, and it's been a productive trip so far.
I'm sure you're doing a great job of spreading the truth about Israel, about what's going on here, and talking about JNS. Top story, Alex, all over the world, really. The death of the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, who was killed along with several other high-ranking officials in a helicopter crash along the Iranian-Azerbaijan border. Raisi was 63 years old, known as the Butcher of Tehran. He killed thousands of political dissidents through his reign. And now we'll have to see what happens in Iran, who takes over. We know that the Ayatollahs ultimately call the shots in Iran in terms of their policy, ruling with an iron fist. Alex, how significant is the death of this president? Are they just going to put another guy up there front and center?
Well, there's going to be another election for the president of Iran within 50 days. There'll be a transition, the deputy president now taking over. As you mentioned, the president is not the one who sets policy in Iran. Rather, he's the one that implements policy. But Raisi was largely considered by many to be a possible successor to the Grand Ayatollah in Iran, Ali Khamenei. And another one of the possible successors was Khamenei's own son. So there are all kind of conspiracy theories that are circulating right now. Number one, whether Israel and the Mossad did it, even though Israel said that they have had nothing to do with it. And then there's also conspiracy theories that it could have been an inside job to take out one of the main successors to Khamenei. But you have to see. Also, the foreign minister, Abdullah Ian, who was murdered, was killed also in the helicopter crash. Not a good person. He's been conducting diplomacy for the Iranian regime. Definitely a period of vulnerability now for Iran, and a question of whether Israel will take advantage of this period of vulnerability, or whether they will just let it pass and see who emerges as the next president.
Israel, of course, denying having any responsibility in his death. But if you go to social media, X, Twitter, whatnot, you have so many people saying automatically this was the Zionists who did it. And that's why last night I actually was being just, I guess, a little bit extra cautious to see if maybe Iran would try to respond. Just several weeks ago, they fired over 400 missiles at Israel. And you never know with the Iranians in terms of what they're going to do in response to something that Israel is clearly not behind.
Josh, there was some chatter on Telegram chats in Persian saying that the pilot of the helicopter was a Mossad agent, and his name was Eli Kopter.
Right.
So you have all kinds of chatter about what this could have been. Not usual to see a head of state killed in a helicopter crash like this. It actually took them a long time for rescue workers to find the helicopter because it crashed in the mountains in bad weather. We don't know if Israel's behind it. We assume right now that Israel was not behind it. Of course, Israel has been behind other strikes on top members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But here we'll have to wait and see if any more information comes out about how Raisi and others died, how they crashed, and what will be the result in the next period of time.
Well, there's one thing's for certain. There's a little bit less evil in the world this morning. I can say that confidently. And Alex, switching gears here, this just came through. JNS actually reporting, there's breaking news here. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor will seek arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as for Hamas leaders. So the ICC there putting Prime Minister Netanyahu and the defense minister and other leaders in Israel in the same category as the evil Iranian-sponsored Hamas leaders down in Gaza. This is breaking news here.
Well, this has just been the continuation of the blood libels against the state of Israel. Israel fighting one of the most just wars in modern history after Hamas came across the border between Gaza and Israel with 3,000 terrorists brutally murdering in the most horrific massacre that we've ever seen, really since the Holocaust. Over 1,200 people, kidnapping over 250 others, injuring thousands of others. Basically, a declaration of war in the most brutal fashion. Israel's been fighting a war in the most just fashion, killing less civilians per combatant than any other modern military in the history of warfare. And yet, the International Court of Justice trying Israel on the basis of potential genocide, and now the International Criminal Court following through with the rumors that we'd already heard several weeks ago, calling for the arrest warrants of Israel's Prime Minister and Defense Minister, the Chief of Staff, and others. And like you said, putting Israel on par with one of the most horrific terror organizations the world's ever seen, Hamas. So we can understand now clearly that the United Nations, International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, they are siding with Hamas. They are siding with Iran in this war, and they're hanging one of the world's most liberal countries, a modern democracy that fights according to all the rules of international law. They're just equivocating the state of Israel with a terror organization, and it's a question as to why Israel continues to remain party to any of these organizations. Of course, the International Criminal Court really doesn't have much jurisdiction at all, but it may cause a problem for Israelis to travel to Europe and other places in the future.
Yeah, I was going to ask next, if Israel doesn't recognize the legitimacy of the ICC, what could it be? What could it mean, rather, practically? I guess if Netanyahu gets on a plane, lands in New York for a meeting, they could potentially storm the plane and arrest him. I mean, do you think we're going to get to that point?
Well, not in New York. I don't think the United States will value the ruling of the court, even if they do issue arrest warrants. And we haven't yet received word that the arrest warrants will be issued. We're just hearing calls that the prosecutor is asking the court for arrest warrants. But if arrest warrants are issued, and I think we have every reason to assume that this court could issue arrest warrants, it probably wouldn't affect travel to the United States, but it very well could affect travel by Israeli leaders in Europe. There's also the possibility that the arrest warrants could be issued without public notice, such that it could be ambiguous as to whether those warrants were issued. And if, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu would arrive in Belgium, on state business, on non-state business, that he could just be arrested at the airport.
Yeah, that would be crazy, but we'll have to monitor this very closely where this goes. But as the ICC turns against the leaders of Israel, the leaders of Israel seem to be turning against each other. And I'm talking about specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, who was on TV just the other night, and he threatened to leave Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition if the premier does not declare a plan for the day after Israel defeats Hamas. And he has a whole list of demands, which I'm not going to read here, but he has his demands. And at the same time, several days earlier, you have Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant also pressuring Netanyahu to formulate a day after plan. Gallant saying that Netanyahu should announce he is opposed to the establishment of Israeli military rule in Gaza. So you have two key members of the Israeli cabinet making these declarations or threats that the prime minister has to change his ways. Gantz saying flat out that I think by June 8th, if things aren't resolved, if his demands aren't met, he is going to bolt the coalition, bolt the government. How serious should Netanyahu take these threats, number one, from Gantz, and number two, from Gallant, who's actually a member of the Likud, a member of his own party?
Well, yeah, you have two things going on here. Number one, the first is the question of the plan for the day after. in the Gaza Strip. And of course, the United States has been very clear that they want to see the Gaza Strip handed over to the Palestinian Authority. Remember in 2005 when Israel left Gaza, the Gaza Strip was handed over to the Palestinian Authority. It took them only a year to lose control of Gaza and for Hamas to take over, and then for Hamas's rule in Gaza to be reinstated, fully instituted through an election that took place in Gaza, where the Palestinians living in Gaza voted for Hamas. If there would be an election today inside the Gaza Strip, Hamas would win again. If there would be an election inside the Palestinian Authority-controlled territories in Judea and Samaria, Hamas probably would win that election as well. And so Netanyahu has stated very clearly that he doesn't want there to be a Hamas stand in Gaza, and he doesn't want there to be a Fatah stand in Gaza. Fatah is the faction of Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority. So Netanyahu has been clear that he doesn't want the Palestinian Authority Gaza. So now if you don't have Hamas ruling Gaza and you don't have Fatah ruling Gaza, who do you have ruling Gaza? Now Netanyahu has been very coy about that, and perhaps Israel's taken a bad decision. Perhaps from the very first moment, Israel should have come in and said that they were establishing martial law in the Gaza Strip. Perhaps Israel should have been the one to say that all humanitarian aid that's going to be distributed throughout the Gaza Strip is going to be distributed not by World Kitchen and other humanitarian NGOs or UN-backed NGOs or UNRWA, but rather that Israel was going to be the one that was distributing the aid to the Palestinian Authority. Israel could have said that it is going to be the force that for the time being is going to be overseeing the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. Israel should have said that the only power that can possibly maintain security anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is the IDF. And that when you saw pictures of Israel going into the Parliament building in Gaza and taking pictures and then later destroying the building, maybe they should not have destroyed the building. Maybe they should have gone in, put an Israeli flag on top of that building and say that for the time being, that the IDF is going to be in control and this would be a military occupation of the Gaza Strip. And then there would be a transition to local Palestinian authority, not Palestinian Authority, but local Palestinian leadership, municipal leadership in various areas. And that Israel would set a time frame for some kind of a transition to local Palestinian leadership that was not bent on terrorism and fighting the state of Israel. But Israel has not done that. Netanyahu has not said that, and he's been very vague about what would be on the day after. Now, the second part of this is that Gantz is a political challenger to Netanyahu. Gallant has emerged as a political challenger to Netanyahu from inside the Likud. Remember, it was Gallant that went behind Netanyahu's back during the judicial reform protest and called for the prime minister to bring back the proposed judicial reforms, to retract those reforms. So Gallant has now, for the second time, come out against the prime minister, the one that appointed him as the defense minister. Both Gallant has spoken oftentimes to Anthony Blinken and others in the United States, and Gantz himself went to the White House just a few months ago on a trip that wasn't approved by Netanyahu. They have been conspiring with the Biden administration. The Biden administration has been very clear over the last several months. They want Netanyahu out of office. So they are using this issue of the plan for the day after now as the hinge to try to get Netanyahu to buckle and ultimately to try to push an election in Israel so that they're hoping that the Israeli people will finally brush Netanyahu out of power.
So Gallant, again, a member of the Likud party, perhaps trying to unseat Netanyahu at the end of the day. He said the day after Hamas will only be achieved with Palestinian, his words, entities taking control of Gaza, accompanied by international actors. Indecision is, in essence, a decision, he added. Let's take a look at the defense minister's comments.
לכן, עלינו לחסל את יכולתו השלטונית של החמאס. המפתח לכך הוא פעילות צבאית וביסוס גורם שלטוני חלופי. בהיעדר חלופה כזו, ייוותרו רק שתי אפשרויות גרועות. שלטון חמאס בעזה, או ממשל צבאי ישראלי בעזה. אי החלטה כמוה כבחירת אחת משתי החלופות הגרועות.
So there you have his comments, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. You had Benny Gantz with his comments the other night, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir slamming those who are opposed to a complete Hamas decimation, which does not include no Arab entities taking over. He is a believer, along with other ministers, that Israel must maintain a presence, military, and probably in his view, a civilian presence eventually in Gaza after the war is over.
And what Netanyahu said was that Benny Gantz shouldn't be issuing ultimatums to the prime minister. He should be issuing ultimatums to Hamas. So it's very clear that the spirit of unity, which reestablished itself in Israel after October 7th, that this spirit is now dissipating very quickly. The political rivalries are re-emerging, and I would suggest that there is probably a very good chance that Israel will be careening toward an election within the next 3 to 6 months.
It sounds insane at this point, but we did have 5 elections, I think, in the span of 2 years, so it is very, very possible. But turning back to the war in
5
Gaza,
elections in 5 years.
In 5 years. Turning back to the war in Gaza, you have reports, Con 11 reported on Saturday night that the IDF revealed around 50 tunnels, underground tunnels connecting Egypt to the southernmost point in Gaza, Rafah, Rafah, 50 tunnels, and the IDF is destroying those tunnels. But my question is really, how was Egypt able to turn a blind eye to these terror tunnels for so long? I mean, Egypt and Israel have had a peace treaty for many, many years. Certainly, the highest levels of government in Egypt knew that Hamas was smuggling weapons, essentially an underground highway system between Egypt and Rafah and Gaza. How did Egypt just let this go for so many years?
Right, you have Egypt, which has been threatening Israel, saying that between the two will be in tatters if Israel went into Rafah. And now clearly we're seeing every single day how many weapon shafts are being uncovered in Rafah, including those that are going into Egypt, have, as you said, facilitated the smuggling of weapons and other materials into the Gaza Strip. It's very much validating Israel's demand that it needed to go into Rafah. The IDF fighting very bitter battles in that area. So it's not just civilians that are sitting there and Israel tackling civilians. Israel is going in and taking these tunnels. Now, of course, Egypt is saying that the peace treaty is being threatened, but really Israel should be turning around to Egypt, as you suggested, Josh, and saying, hey, you were supposed to be peace treaty. You were supposed to be preventing the smuggling of goods into Gaza. That's why the border between Rafah and Egypt was supposed to be so tightly secured. And no, that hasn't been the case at all. And of course, Egypt is now not permitting humanitarian aid to go through Rafah. They let go through the tunnels. They don't let things go through the front door. We also heard reports that there are many senior Hamas leaders that are going to hospital and are currently receiving treatment in hospitals in Turkey. How did they get out of the Gaza Strip? Right through the front door of the border crossing with Rafah. And there was a lot of smuggling taking place that $10,000 could get you through that gate, or they could have been smuggled through these tunnels. So a lot of big questions about Egypt's role in facilitating the military buildup of Hamas, and again, a validation on the part of Israel that it did need to go into Rafah. We're seeing that on a daily basis.
Yeah, Egypt, they're reinforcing its border, making sure that no so-called civilians in Gaza are able to get into the country of Egypt. Any other conflict throughout the world, you have refugees or people seeking to escape the conflict and they're allowed in. But in this case, the Muslims, Arabs in Egypt not assisting their brothers in Rafah or anywhere in Gaza get into Egypt, escape the fighting, yet the international community is focused solely on Israel, but oftentimes forgets or ignores the fact that Gaza shares a border with Egypt, completely leaving them out of the picture, letting them off the hook. And now we see weapon smuggling tunnels going from Egypt, ignored by the Egyptian leaders, into Gaza. And just to give you a little bit more of an update on the situation in Rafah, The Israeli Air Force struck over 70 targets in Gaza on Saturday, including weapons depots, infrastructures, building belonging to terror groups. You had a key Islamic Jihad operative killed. I also saw reports of a key Hamas money transfer, somebody who provides weapons and money to that terror organization. He was taken out in a direct strike on a vehicle in Gaza. In eastern Rafah, you have Givati Brigade troops who are handling business there, taking out an RPG-wielding operative, raiding sites, other commander units of the IDF targeting terrorist infrastructure throughout Rafah. So Israel is in Rafah, but it's still that limited entry into Rafah in the eastern side of the city, but it's not a full-blown entry throughout the entire town.
Well, Israel has still to move civilians out of harm's way before they move through the city. So they're going very methodically. They're telling civilians to leave. Close to half of the residents that were holed up in Rafah have moved to areas just north of Rafah, and then the IDF comes in behind very methodically. But we're seeing again that the IDF is involved in bitter firefights there, is uncovering tons of weapons, is uncovering tunnel shafts. And I think you should also, going back to the question of Egypt, not forget that Egypt receives tremendous amount of money, from what I understand, about $1.6 billion a year in annual aid from the United States. And the United States could have leaned on Egypt from the very beginning to have the Gazan refugees move across the border into Egypt, which would have allowed the IDF to more quickly move through the Gaza Strip without having to deal with the civilian population there. Humanitarian aid could have been set up for Palestinians, Gazans on the Egyptian side of the border, also removing the pressure on Israel to do that. But of course, states not putting any pressure on Egypt whatsoever to be of any kind of assist in this war, and keeping all of the diplomatic pressure on the state of Israel. So I think that this is also a failure by the United States. It's a failure by Israel to demand it. Israel could have blown the border between Gaza and Egypt wide open in the first days of the war. It isn't on that. And it's making life much more difficult for Israel to facilitate this war, but they're doing it, and they're doing it methodically, and they're doing it despite the challenges, and they're doing it despite the fact that Egypt, which does have a 7-mile border with Gaza, is not only being unhelpful, but has allowed for these tunnel shafts to smuggle materials right into the Gaza Strip.
So as you said, Israel is definitely making progress even with all these challenges, and we will win. We will do what is necessary in Rafah in order to take out the remaining brigades of Hamas. Unfortunately, though, right as we were going into Shabbat last week, it was announced by the IDF that 5 soldiers were killed in a friendly fire incident. That's actually in northern Gaza. At the same time, the IDF recovered the bodies of 4 hostages over the weekend. So this was an actual IDF operation seeking to recover those bodies. And just very, very sad going into Shabbat this week, hearing the news of the 5 soldiers and of the 4. I mean, obviously we want the hostages to be brought back and those who were killed buried here in Israel, but still sad to see the images of those 4 innocent civilians who lost their lives, who were murdered by Hamas at the Nova Festival. And in one case, one of the hostages was simply riding his bike along the Gaza envelope border there near Be'eri, a place that I've been to. I've ridden my bike down there. He was caught there on October 7th and murdered by Hamas. So very, very sad. Turning our attention to other news here in Israel, the Biden administration, of course, getting their hands involved in everything related to the war in Gaza. The top Biden aide, Jake Sullivan, meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu, this after a visit to the Saudi Arabian capital, in order to talk about also the day after the war. And according to Sullivan, his request from Netanyahu is that Israel will assist in the establishment of a so-called Palestinian state, and the Saudis will then agree to normalize relations. So rewarding Hamas for October the 7th, that is essentially the plan of the United States, by providing the PA, which we saw in Gaza eventually became Hamas, with a state. after what they did, after they massacred 1,200 plus Israelis on the 7th of October?
Well, as you mentioned, the Biden administration made clear that the creation of a Palestinian state is their preferred outcome of the October 7th massacre, which is just an inevitable turn of events, and really it really is just hanging their ally, the state of Israel, out to dry. To think that a horrific massacre like October 7th could lead to the creation of a Palestinian state, it's the massacre of October 7th which demonstrates why the Palestinians cannot have a state. Israel pulled out of 2005. That was the pilot project for an independent Palestinian entity. The focus of a two-state solution was called a peace process. And instead of peace, Israel's gotten war. Now, the Jake Sullivan and others are dangling normalization with Saudi Arabia in front of Israel and saying that the only way that Israel will get normalization with Saudi Arabia is if there is the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, Israel was already on a track to normalize with the Saudis before the Biden administration took office. The Biden administration slowed the momentum on the normalization between Saudi and Israel. The Saudis, by all accounts, do not care if there is a Palestinian state created inside Judea and Samaria, inside Gaza. That's an American demand. The second thing is that the Biden administration has not been kind to the Saudis since they have taken office. Remember the Khashoggi affair, and to go basically beg in Saudi Arabia, basically for forgiveness. There's almost no way that the Saudis would be willing to give the Biden administration a major diplomatic victory by having some kind of a signing ceremony with Israel ahead of the upcoming elections in November. That's simply not going to happen. There's not going to be a signing ceremony, but Sullivan and the Americans making it clear as though Israel is the one that is suddenly blocking the normalization. It will normalize relations with the Saudis, but again, the Saudis are expecting Israel to defeat Hamas in Gaza. They are expecting Israel to defeat Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. When that happens, and Iran no longer poses a major threat to the entire region, and specifically to Israel and to Saudi Arabia, you will see normalization between the Saudis and Israel. The fact that Sullivan is now advancing this and saying that the Israelis are what's holding it up, it's a real perversion of the events in the Middle East, and it's a perversion of the understandings that the Saudis have and that the Israelis have.
Yeah, what the Biden administration doesn't understand, and we've seen this for years now, is the fact that this is the Middle East. This isn't the U.S.-Canada border. Respect and power are what do the talking here. When you show weakness, when you make concessions, that is not respected, and your enemies trample over you. The Saudi Arabia, I agree with you, is not going to be sitting at any ceremony right now under the Biden administration. Only strength prevails here in the Middle East, and either they're ignoring it over there in the States, or they just don't get it. And at the same time, you have the Biden administration threatening to veto the Israel weapons bill. We brought this up last week. The Republican Party, in response to the Biden embargo on major munition shipments, which Israel needs in order to go into Rafah full-fledged, the Republicans put a bill together saying that the administration must transfer those munitions per congressional law. And the Biden administration saying that they're going to go ahead and veto any sort of action by the Republicans to advance the Israel weapons bill.
Yeah, you're seeing now the fight between the support of Israel between Congress and the Biden administration. Israel has overwhelming support in the Congress. It is the Biden administration that wants to use these weapons transfers, wants to use the potential of Saudi normalization, wants to use every amount of leverage that it possibly can to Israel conduct the war the way they want to conduct it, which is not the way that Israel wants this war conducted. Weapons are not 100% necessary for the operation in Rafah. Rather, these weapons are necessary if Israel is going to move the war into a second front, which would be in southern Lebanon. And remember that Hezbollah poses a much more potent threat to the Israeli home front than Hamas at this point, than Hamas did on October 6th, for that matter. And so Israel will need these heavy weapons, these precision-guided weapons, in order to conduct that war. Very clear from the United States that they don't want to see the expansion of the war on the northern front. This is the reason why they're holding up the weapons. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Ron Dermer, others have said that Israel will fight with their fingernails. What that to do. You have other members of the Likud party saying that if the United States doesn't provide the precision-guided weapons, that Israel will not precision-guided weapons. And if you talk about the American demand to reduce civilian casualties, what reduces civilian casualties is precision-guided munitions. And Israel's saying that if we don't get the precision-guided munitions, which can help reduce civilian casualties, then we might have to use weapons that are not precision-guided, and that might only increase the amount of collateral damage in attacks. So Israel will perpetrate the war using what it has. They're doing that already in Rafah, as we've discussed, and they will use whatever weapons they have at their disposal to fight defensive and a just war, whether or not the Biden administration will support Israel with the weapons that Congress has mandated must come to the state of Israel.
Yeah, we're seeing on a daily basis dozens and dozens of rockets and missiles and drones being launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon on the residents of northern Israel. Actually, whatever residents are still in their homes. We have so many who are out of their homes as a result of what's going on in the northern border. But the bottom line is it will certainly have to be dealt with. And it seems that this administration right now here in Israel, as you said, with their fingernails, will deal with Hamas, will deal with Hezbollah, do whatever is necessary to preserve the Jewish state of Israel. Alex, we are out of time for today. There are other topics that we didn't even get to. There's so much going on in the news, but I want to wish you much success on your travels, on your trip, on your speaking tour in the U.S., and on your fundraising efforts for JNS. And only good things to you. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz, our engineer extraordinaire. And don't forget out there, you can go to JNS TV on YouTube to see so much amazing content from the state of Israel, from here in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Alex, good luck to you, and everyone else have a great week.